This video is kindly sponsored by Mrs. Quilty.
Hello! Today I would like to talk about fabric scraps. More specifically, how to use them and not throw them away. Apologies for the poor lighting, by the way. I just had a very busy week at college. I couldn't get around to filming this until it's a bit later, so I don't have great lighting in my studio. But that doesn't change what I'm going to talk about today. I save most of the remnants of my projects. This is scraps. This is also scraps, and this is even smaller scraps. And yeah, that's a lot, but I do have plans for all of them, I promise. I have organized all of my ideas and inspiration into two categories. The first being material you could make with your scraps in order to use for bigger projects, and the second being projects that actually can just use your scraps. I'm not gonna be going too much into how to do all of this in this video. I don't think that we have time for that, but it should be informative and give you some ideas, if nothing else. So let's get into it. Warning, the words cool, fun, exciting, and patchwork are probably going to be overused in this video. Sincere apologies. A rapid fire, this video is going to be 2 minutes long. Patchworking, only squares, pick a few colors, enhance with embroidery thread, uniform shapes, shred, sew directly onto fabric, place under tulle, place under organza, chiffon, ruffles, projects, coasters, quilt blocks, garlands, pennant banners, patches, applique, fabric flowers, yo-yos, Suffolk pokes, fabric rope, twine, and a base for embroidery projects. Did you get that? Okay, moving on. Just kidding. We'll start with patchworking, which is a very broad term. Patchworking itself can be done so many different ways, and sometimes I don't even think about all the ways that it can be done in order to make it interesting and still unique with each and every project. So obviously the first and foremost method of patchworking is probably just sewing stuff together. It's very simple, but there's so many options for this. You can sew stuff together only in certain shapes, like only in squares, only in triangles, only in random shapes, only in curved shapes, only with curved seams. So that's obviously a very broad category, but you can also kind of change up the size of your patchwork. You could go really small. I've done this with a few projects where I just put tiny little 2" by 2" squares together, and it almost doesn't even look like patchwork anymore. It looks like you're creating your own fabric, which I think can be really cool. The second method that I have for patchworking is to enhance it with embroidery thread, i.e. stitch over your seams with embroidery thread. You can do different colors, you can do the same color. I think this is really cool. Whenever you're patchworking scraps together, I think that it can be really cool to just deliberately choose a couple of colors to patchwork together. You can do sorts of gradients of patchworking. You can just do two colors that contrast each other, and then it's really funky. I have lots of plans for projects that are just using two complementary colors of fabric. They look like you've bought the fabric somewhere. Of course, I think that within patchworking falls quilting. I think quilting itself can mean many things. Quilters' blocks use specific arrangements of fabric pieces, which are often very small, and you can also just sew your patchwork down with batting, and that creates a really cool textile. And that brings us to the sponsor of today's video, which is Mrs. Quilty. If you're not familiar with Mrs. Quilty, it is a quilting subscription box. They have two plan options. You can get the box every month, or you can get their new pattern box, which has around 8 to 10 patterns per month. And if you're interested in either of these boxes, you can use my coupon code JANE20 for 20% off your first order. I think Mrs. Quilty is really cool, and they have kindly given me one of their boxes to try out today. Each box comes with a magazine, several really fun patterns for projects, and then their monthly quilters block, and it also comes with 12 fat quarters. So this month's box has a very light pastel palette. The quilters block for this month is the windmill block, and whenever I've tried quilting, I have always struggled with adding the correct amount of seam allowance for my triangle shapes. I was very happy to try out this block. The instructions are super helpful, and I have not struggled with any part of the process. Also, each of the projects in the magazine take me around 30 minutes, so they're very great for beginners and anybody just wanting to get a little quick project done for fun. So yeah. This is 1/4 of my quilt block. I think I need to do this in the morning when I'm not quite so tired because the corners are not quite squared up. I have tried, but I have a lot of difficulty with getting things exactly lined up. But essentially the quilters block will be made up of 4 of these. So this is really the base block for this project. And I'm glad that I have Mrs. Quilty to help me improve on my quilting techniques. If you want more information on Mrs. Quilty, I'll have their website linked below, and I highly recommend you go check them out. I have next written on my list, shred. 2 exclamation marks. I know that everybody who sews gets tiny little bits from their projects that are not even big enough to do quilting patchwork techniques with. So I would say the first thing you can do with these is actually just take a piece of solid fabric that is not in shredded form and pin all of these scraps, or use a basting spray and put them on top of this solid piece of fabric, and then sew them on with lots of lines. Sew them on however you want, but I think that lines would probably be the most time efficient for you. And then you end up with this really crazy confetti fabric that I think would be so cool for a coat or anything that's a little bit thicker, maybe a really thick dress. Anyway, the possibilities are endless. Next up, you can take these shreds of fabric and place them underneath a piece of tulle. I've done a dress like this and it's probably one of my favorite projects ever. It's crazy. It has this melted crayon look because the pieces of fabric are so small and I did a color gradient, so I think that it is really cool. Probably say about every single one of the techniques that it's really cool. Let's just assume that they're all cool. In lieu of using tulle, you can also just use a sheer piece of fabric, which is actually fabric and not a form of netting, an organza or a chiffon or anything of that nature. And this unifies the colors a bit more because you've got an overlay on top, which is kind of muting down everything that's underneath it. And this is also really cool. I do this all the time. I probably will not be stopping anytime soon. Last up, this is really strange and I don't know if it counts, but you can actually make ruffles out of long strips of fabric and sew those onto a solid piece of fabric that is already solid and not scraps, and then you have a really cool textile. I like to do this with scraps. I also like to do this with one piece of fabric, but if you do it with scraps, you're going to have a really crazy effect. The colors are going to be so wild. The ruffles are so much fun. You can also change the width of your strips because that will change the width of the ruffle, obviously, and you can change the amount of gather you're giving the ruffle, so there's a lot of possibilities with this. Okay, we'll move on to projects that actually use your scraps because they are smaller projects. The first thing that I have written on here is coasters. I have a video about how to make coasters out of your scrap fabric. I think that they're super cute. I've done regular, just square-shaped coasters with quilt blocks on them. I've done heart-shaped coasters, and I've also done house-shaped coasters. These I've seen a lot more online, even since I made that video, so they don't use a lot of fabric at all. You can also do garland. I've done star garland as well as heart garland. You just cut out the shape that you want out of your smaller scraps, sew them together, stuff them. I actually use my serger clippings as stuffing and it works really well for me. And then I sew them together with embroidery thread and beads and I hang them around my room. They feel like something the girls and Little Women would have around the house. That's just the vibe of them to me. I really like them actually. I also am going to be creating pennant banners for my wedding, a lot of pennant banners, and I haven't decided exactly on the size of my triangle yet, but you could do so many different kinds of banners with scrap fabric. Obviously pennant banners are triangles, but I think that you could also do something really cool with circles. I've seen this done with construction paper. You could also do ringlets. I did it in elementary school with paper. You would connect two pieces of paper together like this. Sorry, that's a strange visual. And you hang them up and they're actually pretty strong. And I don't see a reason why you can't do this with fabric. Okay, moving on from house decorations. You can also make oven mitts out of scrap fabric, and this requires patchworking, of course. You do have to make sure that they're quilted correctly. You need to be using 100% cotton batting and ideally a really thick batting so that whenever you're using them, they don't burn you. But it is a very good project that doesn't really take a whole lot of fabric. I don't think I could go a single video at this point without talking about fabric flowers. They've been my obsession for the last 4 months. I've been making clothes out of them. I've been putting them on clothes. I've done a whole lot of things with them. So there are a few ways to go about this. First and foremost, cut petal shapes out of scraps and then do a zigzag stitch around the edges of the petals, or if it's a synthetic fabric, just burn the edges and that will keep it from fraying. And then you can just sew these onto a garment or whatever you're doing with them to create flower shapes. I've done this a lot and it's really cool. But you could also use scraps in a die cutter. I've recently purchased a die cutter and I'm using it a lot. So you can put your scraps in there and just get a few flower dies. Get whatever kind of dies you want, actually. You do other things besides flowers, but I'm personally doing flowers right now. And so you can use your scraps for fabric flowers. And if you're using fabrics that are really pretty, these look so professional and it is so much more affordable than the craft store flowers. Trust me, I've done a lot of searching for craft store flowers over the past couple months. So yeah. This is kind of similar to flowers, but my next idea is to create yo-yos or Suffolk polks. So cut a circle of whatever size you want out of your fabric, and then you gather the edge of it and you have a cute little flower looking thing. It's not quite a flower, it's circular, but it's very cute. And I am going to be making a dress out of these at some point. I have a lot going on right now, but I will be doing a dress out of these. You could also do a coat. I've seen robes made out of these of all different sizes. Again, you could do same color, different colors. This might be kind of a cop-out because it's probably the easiest use of scraps, but you could just sew them on to another project, i.e. use them as applique or little patches that aren't really anything specific, little abstract patches, and it could be really cool. It'll look like a little Kandinsky painting on your body. So if that's a plus for you, you could absolutely do it because I've done it and I like it. Anyway, you can actually make fabric rope or twine out of your scraps. For this, you really need long strips. So that is a downside, but you just wind these together, making sure to twist away from the fabric that you're going to be twisting around so that whenever the strips try to untwist, they're twisting into each other and creating a really strong rope. And then personally, if I was gonna make this rope, I would use it for a rug. I think I would just try to sew it all together and create some kind of flat, thicker textile like that. But I'm sure there are other things you could do with it that I just haven't even thought of. I have one more thing to share with you all, and I promise I'm not saying it just to brag about my fish, but I will be showing my fish because you can actually use scrap fabric as a base for embroidery projects like the fish that I'm working on right now. I'll show you the one that is in progress. Here is one that I have completed. Pretty sick, right? And that was just a scrap piece of cotton that I used in order to put my embroidery on. I do also have a stabilizer on there, but you do need some kind of fabric. So a scrap is a good use for that. Now I'm working on this one right now. The thing is, I always thought that these were called dory fish because if you look up dory fish online, this fish is what comes up and it never says anything else. So why wouldn't you think that it's a dory fish? But no, it's only because everybody looks up dory fish because everybody doesn't know what the fish is called because it's just Dory from Finding Nemo, but the fish actually has a name. It's a blue regal tang. That has a totally different connotation than dory fish. I thought that for my whole life until I told my fiance that I was embroidering a dory fish and he said, I don't know what you're talking about because that's not a fish. I mean, I don't know how he knows his fish that well, but anyway. That is my last of my ideas for what to do with scrap fabric. Here it is again. I think that there are so many ideas I don't even know about out there. I would love to have you tell me what you think you could do with it or what you have done. And yeah, I'm very passionate about this because I don't want to create more waste whenever I sew. And I know that that is inevitable in many cases, but I just try to do what I can to use everything that I can in a project. I hope that this video has given you some inspiration for saving your scraps and doing something with them that is cool and also sustainable. I love to sew and I do love using big, nice pieces of fabric to have a uniform color in my project, but I will be creating tons more scraps in the future, so I have to keep finding new ways to use them. Don't forget to use my code JANE20 for 20% off your Mrs. Quilty subscription box or pattern box, whatever you choose. And let me know as well what you're working on. I'm very excited to hear. You can find me on my socials, Instagram, TikTok, and Pinterest, and all of those will be linked below if you want to see more of me or more of my sewing. And I hope you have a lovely day.